Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1760. The topic is Q&A and the title is, How Can I Challenge Myself in Training Safely? So I just started working with a client. He's beat himself up and came to me to help fix that. So we're going to get him back to healthy, get him feeling better. But I wanted to tell a little bit about his story and some of the discussions that we've had recently. Now, he's in his early 50s. He used to do a lot of strength training for sports when he was younger. Loved the gym more than he loved the sports, so he kind of stuck with the gym. He does strength and enough like muscle building stuff to have a very good athletic body, but he always wanted to be able to move himself well. So it was a blend of strength, muscle mass, but also what's called relative strength, which is how strong you are relative to your body weight, versus absolute strength, which is regardless of your body weight, what's the heaviest thing that you can lift. So if somebody can deadlift 800 pounds, but they weigh 400 pounds, that is not a high level of relative strength. Whereas if somebody, like I have one client, they weigh 150 and they can deadlift around 650. So crazy strong there. I'm trying to remember what their actual max was that we just pulled. I think it was 645, maybe 650. So that's what is that? 1,000 times body weight. So that would be really high level of relative strength. So the 650 is less than 800. But the 650 was lifted by a 150-pound person. The 800 is lifted by a 400-pound person. So the 400-pound person has more absolute strength because they can just lift the heavier thing. But the 150-pound person has way more relative strength because they can lift a heavier thing relative to their body weight, relative to themselves. So he always wanted to have that. But he's been going a little crazy and got himself hurt. He recently tried a 1-rep max on back squat, and he said he just felt kind of froggy one day and felt like he was slipping mentally and wanted to get himself back on track. So he got angry and said, screw this, I'm going to kill this weight, and I'm going to teach myself not to be lazy and blah, 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 blah. And he went in the gym and did a pretty good lift, but he tweaked his hip and lower back area, and that kind of ticked him off. And then he was doing some jumping drills and hurt his hamstring connection into his knee. And he said it was just everything keeps adding up. He's got some elbow pains, got some shoulder pains. He has that lower back problem now. Now he's got that hamstring and knee problem. And he's like, dude, I don't know what's happening. It can't be that I can't do these things anymore. And I was like, well, let's look at what we can control. So I asked him to get his blood work done to see where his testosterone was. Make sure he got his hormones all in place. There's a lot more to that than just testosterone, but we wanted to make sure his hormones were in the right places. Then we looked at nutrition. So I checked out his calories, checked out his protein, make sure that he was eating enough and that it was timed out well so that he was maximizing his recovery between workouts. We also looked at hydration, make sure he was drinking enough. He was not. That was a big thing. Definitely not drinking enough fluid throughout the day. So we worked on that. We also talked about recovery supplements, joint supplements, glutamine for muscle recovery. We were talking about some things for sleeping as well because he doesn't sleep well. So we talked about melatonin to maybe help him get a little bit more sleepy before bed. So we went through all that. And then that relates to today's podcast is we talked about the idea of how to challenge himself. He's old school. So for him to test himself is 1-rep maxes. What's the heaviest thing that I can move? And he said that was what he kind of grew up with. People celebrated how much could you bench. People celebrate how much can you deadlift. He's like, that's what they always ask. Is what's your 1-rep max or how much you bench and this. So he said that was always the test. However, these extremes of weight, heaviness of weight, are starting to take their toll on him, and he wants to find safer ways to still get that high in training of a really hard challenge that he was able to meet, able to overcome. And he said that just motivates him, it keeps him going, and he can't imagine lifting without those feelings. So he was bummed, that he thought he was going to have to give that up. So I wrote him some programming that has some pretty wicked tests in there, and he's loving it, absolutely loving it so far. So I thought it would be fun to share. That's kind of what prompted me to think of the podcast. So I'm going to give 5 tips today on ways you can challenge yourself in training but safer. Okay. Number 1, higher rep maxes. Do not do 1 rep maxes if you want to stay safe. It's either you do it or you don't, and the don't is, oh crap. Maybe I can dump the bar, maybe I can get out of it safely, but if I don't get it, sometimes position breaks down, and therefore a muscle can break or a joint can break. Something just gets tweaked or hurt. I was actually talking with another client of mine. She was feeling really good. We fixed her food. She had been trying a bunch of crazy diets and training on her own. So she reached out. I've worked with her, I think, over 10 years ago or so. And she reached out and asked if I would help out again. So I was like, hell yeah, of course. So I looked at what she was doing, not consistent enough, not feeding enough. It's one of those typical, you eat less and less and less trying to lose body fat, and then all of a sudden you're eating nothing and you feel miserable and you still can't lose the body fat. So we had to fix the food. And then for her training, I got her doing more muscle-based training rather than like these endless bouts of cardio. So she's feeling amazing. She can definitely see more muscle lines, feeling leaner, feeling more energy. So one day she went into the gym, was feeling great in her workout, and ended up doing a 1 rep max on a leg press. Absolutely insane. I do not recommend that. And I even told her that. I said, I'll celebrate that with you because you got a new 1 rep max. I'll celebrate it, but I'm not going to condone it. I'm not going to support this decision. So 1 rep maxes on leg presses are just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Too many things can go wrong. It's way too much pressure on your lower back. If you just move an inch too low, you could tweak your groin. If you overextend at the top, you could tweak your knees. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong, so I do not agree with a 1 rep max on a leg press. So you can do higher rep maxes. One of the things I do is sometimes, we got a hack squat again in the gym, so we went a period of time without one, and I brought one back in. So one of the things I liked to do on the hack squat is I would get a 20 rep max. Then once I could get the weight for all 20 reps without having to take a pause, I would up the weight load and then start over. And maybe I would add, a 25 pound to each side, and all of a sudden now I can only get 14 before I have to pause. And I'll just continue to check that, every month or so, and see if I can push that to 16, push it to 18, push it to 20. Once I get to 20 again, I go ahead and add more weight. So using higher rep maxes are great because it has more leniency. There's more allowance for you to be in a bad position but be able to fix it on the next rep, to where you can get into a bad position, but you're not immediately hurt from that as if you would be if you had a 1 rep max weight on you. So you can kind of fudge positions a little bit. It's also just less dangerous because if your technique wavers at all, it's not heavy enough to hurt you, but yet trying to crank out 20 reps on a hack squat, if you've never done that, it is absolutely awful, and it will give you a sense of, oh dear God, that was an insane challenge. I feel really proud of myself that I was able to do that. So it gives you still that high of a really extreme challenge. I also do 20 reps on leg press. So like bench press, for example, I like 10 rep maxes. It's fun to see if I can do a certain weight for 10 reps, and then if I can, I try to move up in weight again. So using higher rep maxes still gives you a high intensity challenge, but it allows for more leniency of technique variance or small positional nuances where you're not going to get immediately hurt if you're in like just the smidgest of bad positions. Second tip is to use machines instead of free weights. This isn't always true, and in all these cases there's you could argue a little bit back and forth, but machines are usually self-guided and self-stabilized, and that reduces risk of injury since everything's stabilized for you. You can just then crank out the movement and not worry if you twist a little bit this way or you move a little bit that way or something, maybe your hand shifts a half inch out to the left where it shouldn't have. Again, it allows for more protection against positional variance. An example of that might be, instead of a squats, maybe I do the leg press. Now, squats are great to be able to still do. I'm not saying don't ever do squats. Just if you're going to go for, a 10 rep max on a squat, that's very insanely crazy challenge. Very challenging to do an all-out 10 rep max. But if you're like, I don't know, I don't want to tweak my back, I don't want to hurt myself, well, doing a 20 rep max on a leg press is just safer. You are going to have less risk of injury. So using machines instead of free weights does give you that little bit of extra stability, which then gives you more security against injuries or tweaks. Third tip is to use less eccentric loaded movements. What this means, an eccentric portion of an exercise is when the muscle, the targeted muscle, the muscle that's doing the work of the movement, is extending under weight load. Think of a bicep curl. When you curl the weight up to you, towards you, that's a concentric contraction, so concentric portion of the movement. When you're extending by lowering the weight back down, that's the eccentric portion. So I think of it as the concentric portion is the contraction, the eccentric portion is the extension, so EECC. The eccentric portion of a movement is when, if you get overloaded, it's extreme risk of injury. If you get slightly out of position, you're more likely to hurt yourself while a muscle is extending under weight load rather than when it's actually contracting. If you contract while out of position, yes, you can tweak some things. But if you are maximally eccentrically loaded and get out of position, you can really mess some things up. So using exercises that don't have as much of an eccentric load are safer. An example of this is squats versus deadlift. If you want to do a deadlift to try to, get that, and again, I don't condone 1 rep maxes if you're trying to do this safely. Say you're going for a top set of 5 on deadlifts. Assuming that you're doing it with proper technique and you have proper technique regulation, as much as you would need that also for a 5 rep max on squat, you're less likely to get hurt doing the 5 reps on deadlift than you are on squat. Now, I do understand that if somebody doesn't know technique well, they can really tweak their lower back on deadlift because they let their lower back round. So I'm not talking about a 1 rep max where you pull, your lower back rounds, and then you still try to drag it up off the ground and you can hurt yourself. If you're going for a 5 rep max, you'll feel your lower back get slightly out of position on maybe rep 3 or 4, and then you just stop the set and say, damn, this is too heavy for me right now. But it gives you that ability to kind of monitor your position from rep to rep and step out when you're still safe. So movements that have less of an eccentric load tend to be safer than movements that have a greater eccentric loading phase. Okay. Tip number 4 is to use muscle cardio instead of muscle strength. What I mean by this is a couple programs, like for example, 20 reps on a leg press is muscle endurance, muscle strength endurance. That's better than 1 rep on a leg press, which is just muscle strength. I do circuits for people, so maybe I'll have them do 10 kettlebells, well, maybe 20 kettlebell swings into an all-out, 3 minutes on the Concept 2 rower and see how much distance they can cover in 3 minutes. Or we'll do a little like Metcon-y type stuff for CrossFit. So maybe we'll do 20 kettlebell swings, 3 minutes on the rower, right into 15 kettlebell swings, 2 minutes on the rower, right into 10 kettlebell swings, right into 1 minute on the rower. And then in that whole time, they would try to add up the distance that they were able to cover on the rower between the 3, the 2, and the 1, and maybe try to progress the weight that they were able to use on the kettlebell swings eventually, for the 20, 15, 10. But using a circuit like that is crazy intensity, incredibly challenging, And to have a pairing of a contrast between like a muscle-based movement, like the kettlebell swings is like a heavier weighted muscle movement, whereas the rower is more of like, there's some resistance to the flywheel, but it's not like a weighted resistance to the max. It's more of a cardio resistance. But blending in muscles and cardio, like lung capacity challenge, that's going to give you that high of the intensity, but it's going to keep you safer. I also will do reps for time. So if somebody's, say, pretty good at pull-ups, maybe they can do 10 bodyweight pull-ups in a row, I'll say, okay, I want you to do 30 and as fast as you possibly can. And I'll set the timer and I'm like, go. And they have to try to do 30 pull-ups as fast as they possibly can. That's really challenging because I know they can't do them all in a row. So what's the strategy there as well? You know, do you go all out and do 10, and then all of a sudden maybe you can only get 6, and then you get like 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, all the way to 30? Or do you try to pace it out and do, 5 sets of 6, if I'm doing math correctly? So you'll crank out 6, breathe for 20 seconds, crank out 6, breathe for 20 seconds, crank out 6, breathe for 20 seconds. But that becomes the fun of the game, is the fun of the challenge is can I get to that total number faster, and what strategy do I need to do that? So that's kind of fun. You can do rep totals for time. Then the fifth tip is to schedule your self-challenges a little further apart. If you've been doing it, once a week and you're getting tweaks, try to go to every other week. If you're doing it every other week and you're getting tweaks, try to go to once a month. I tend to, for myself, challenge myself about once a month, where I'll just kind of feel on that day, I'm like, dude, it's been too long. You got to try something here. You got to stretch your boundaries. You're getting too comfortable. And then I'll try something crazy. But I do like that, is that the majority of my workouts, I'm addressing what I need and I'm building my capacity. And then maybe once a month, I test my capacity. So there's a difference between workouts that you're building yourself versus testing yourself. You can't always test. You're going to burn out if you go, in the red. You're revved up all times. You're going to burn out. You're going to get those small tweaks and injuries. You're going to not recover as well between each workout, and that lack of full complete recovery adds up over time, and you start getting small annoyances. So back that off. Try your intensities once a month. And just tell yourself that, in the workouts in between, like, I'm here to build myself, make myself better. I'm going to just focus on the quality of what I'm doing. I know once a month I can test myself. So build, then test, rather than just test all the time. Okay, so those are 5 tips on how to challenge yourself in safer ways. Use higher rep maxes. Use machines instead of free weights. Use less eccentric loaded movements. Focus on muscle cardio, not muscle strength. And schedule your challenges a little further apart, about once a month. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, shoot me an email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. Also, if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.